At the very most, it should have just been some obscure footnote at the end of some kind of obscure book, but it's not. It takes on a life of its own in the media, starting with 1893 story that came out in the New York Times about this place. Now, back in those days that you heard, well, today, for example, you heard of pirates in the Caribbean and pirates in Somalia. We had pirates right here in New York City back then, and they were called river pirates. Back in those days, there were ships with valuable cargoes from all over the world. And the longshoremen would find out which ships had the goodies on them. They'd come back at night, kill the crew, and take all the stuff off. And so, according to this story in the Times, the nastiest gang of river pirates had their headquarters in a bar at the foot of Atlantic Avenue. And it said they had a, quote, Aladdin's cave, where they kept all of their booty hidden away in a tunnel under the street. And it said there was so much gold and silver down here, you didn't need to go and bring a torch to see your way around in here. It would just glow, the gold would just glow in the dark by itself. Then the story goes on to say that the entranceway from this bar into the tunnel was guarded by 2 7-foot-tall Turks with scimitars. Now, getting back to reality, was there really a street gang here that were pirates? Yeah, they were called the Smoky Hollow Gang. And where were they located? In a bar room at the end of this tunnel at Atlantic Avenue. And so that part of the story is real. Now, where exactly Smoky Hollow? Where Cobble Hill is today. It was the most notorious slum in the city of New York, rivaling 5 Points in Manhattan. Nowadays, people pay millions of dollars to live in those same buildings that were horrible slums 150 years ago. So, what was the Smoky Hollow Gang like? What did they do? Well, besides being river pirates, they were into anything bad you could think of. Bootlegging, counterfeiting, prostitution, home invasions, anything you want. Now, so, what were they like? Well, go back to some contemporary newspaper articles that I have on my website on the tunnel page. Let's see, I'll give you an example. Saturday nights, they used to play cop baiting. Now, back then, cops didn't have radios, so they'd catch a cop on patrol by himself, 2 guys would hold him down, and the 3rd guy would come over with a 12-pound cobblestone and cave in his head. Then, I'll give you another example. They had a party, and back then they didn't have stereos, so they had a live band. So the gangsters didn't like the way the band was playing their favorite song, so they slit the throats of the musicians. Then the next day, one of these gangsters is sleeping late because he's hungover, and he hears organ grinder music coming up from the street under his window, so he picks up a baseball bat and goes downstairs and kills the organ grinder. So that's where these guys were coming from. Now also, they had a home invasion department, and they would go and find out when people were on trips, and you come back and find your whole house is empty, nothing left. And the person in charge of their home invasion department was a 12-year-old boy. They believed in starting them young back then. So now, what happens next? Well, first you have the story about the river pirates over here. Then you have the story about the German spies in World War I. Then in the 1920s, there was a story that came out in the Daily News that said there was a, quote, army of Italians living down here and growing mushrooms. And then in 1936, another article came out in the New York Times saying that addressed to the police commissioner, saying that they have to break into this tunnel because they're going to find all the dead bodies from Murder Incorporated down here. And the police took this seriously. For 3 days, they searched every basement from the waterfront up to downtown, up to Flatbush Avenue, and didn't come up with anything. But they must have had a good time doing the Atlantic Avenue bar crawl for a few days. So then there were stories about Nazi spies in World War II and Russian spies in the Cold War. And then there were people who would meet up during the 1960s and try to find a way in.